To Kevin Hassett, the former Council of Economic Advisors chairman under President Donald Trump, author of The Drift. So, Kevin, give us your view of the drift right now on the markets, what they're telling us. I know your old boss, like to focus on them because they oftentimes were hitting records. Not so right now, but we're told this president doesn't bother obsessing about them. But now that they're underwater in his presidency, I would imagine he's at least aware of it.
Right. One would hope, but, I've been surprised about the things that President Biden and his team are not aware of. The fact is that a president should focus a lot on markets. And the reason is that markets, as you guys just discussed, are forward-looking. And so markets, if they see a turning point coming or if they see a pit of despair coming, then you see it in the market today. And right now, the markets are down enormously. I guess we haven't seen today yet, about 23% for the year. And I don't think that that's anywhere close to the bottom because the Fed is going to continue to raise interest rates and the White House is going to continue to be in denial. I absolutely think that President Biden should be looking at the markets. He should be thinking about why the markets are rejecting his policies, and then he should think about adjusting those policies. And until he does, then I don't really think we're going to see a bottom.
Kevin, if I could switch to what's happening abroad and skip across the pond to Britain right now, where the Bank of England is saying it would not hesitate to change interest rates by as much as needed to bring down inflation. And what was rattling the British markets today, as were rattling them last week, were these latest proposals on the part of Liz Truss, the new prime minister, to rein in or try to rein in what's happening on the energy front, where utility bills for about 80% of Brits are so overwhelming that a lot of them can't pay them. Right. And she's offering tax cuts. But the tax cuts apparently are being deemed inflationary by the markets and would make a bad thing even worse. It was an interesting take on that. I wonder what yours is.
Right. Well, I think that, the fact is that you get inflation when there's a lot of demand, like we mailed checks to people, and supply is constrained, as it was here, both because of the pandemic and because of Joe Biden's excessive regulation and tax hikes. And so if you look at the way Ronald Reagan and Paul Volcker defeated inflation, they not only had high interest rates, but they also had supply-side tax cuts and a big reduction in discretionary spending. It dropped more than 20% at the beginning of the Reagan administration. And so if you want to fight inflation right now and you're serious about it and you're a student of history, then what you do is you have supply-side tax cuts, but you pay for them with big reductions in government spending, and you have the Fed do what the Fed's doing. And so right now the Fed is going alone. It's rowing with one oar. Fiscal policy is in denial and actually going in the wrong direction with, say, the student debt forgiveness. And so in the U.S., we're not anywhere close. In the UK, I would like to see a little more fiscal responsibility, but I think the supply-side tax cuts are a good start because basically you got to get more supply if you want to get ahead of the curve on inflation, and I think Liz Truss is right to try to do that.
All right, of course, the Reagan distinction there notwithstanding, the fact is that deficits did balloon as time went on, and a lot of revenue came into Washington, as you accurately pointed out, but politicians being politicians proved very able to keep spending that revenue and then some. Do you worry that if Republicans take charge, not that you would worry about that, we could face just a problem of a different stripe here?
Right. Well, I think that what's going to happen if Republicans take charge is that we're going to see, is Joe Biden able to work with Republicans or not? And if he is, there are a lot of sound things that, perhaps Speaker McCarthy has planned for next year because they understand that it's time to act. It's time to make sure that the expiring Trump tax cuts don't expire and to get more fiscally responsible. I could say as an economist, if you look at economic history, it tends to be the times when we have a divided government that markets are happiest and that policy is the most sensible because it's only sort of sound ideas that can get enough votes from both sides to go through. And so I would actually say that if Republicans capture the House, that within a few days of that would be about when the stock market would bottom. But October is going to be very, very scary in markets. It's going to be a lot of volatility because people are going to be worried that it's going to go this way or that way. And if there's a little bit of good news for Democrats and people think that this really profligate spending and, a tax on the supply side, it's going to continue for 2 more years, that I think that the market's going to have to think, well, the Fed's going to lift rates to 8 or 9% because they're the only game in town. And so I actually think that we're going to have a really terrible October and that we'll probably hit bottom if Republicans capture Congress.
So do you think part of this sell-off that's been happening and building momentum has to do with that prospect that Republicans don't do as well in the midterms. They might take the House. It doesn't take a real big leap for that to change. But anything else bigger, or certainly like a 1994 Gingrich revolution wave, doesn't happen. And that's being partly reflected in what the markets have been doing.
Right. I think that absolutely you're right. That the market has been surprised by Fed policy, and the market has been, I think, surprised by the comeback of Democrats in the polls. I think that's probably attributable both to the sort of soap opera of President Trump, the attacks on him, and also because of abortion being such a hot button issue. But this election is going to be about a lot of issues. But as an economist, I could say that if you want the economy to turn around, you have to stop this socialist nonsense that Biden and the Democrats have been doing for the last 2 years.
We'll keep an eye on it, Kevin. Great catching up with you. Be well.
Good to see you, Neil.